For the first time, a majority of Americans support sending U.S. troops to defend Taiwan. That was from a recent survey by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. There are a lot of interesting findings from that survey. 52% of Americans say they support sending U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China invades. 69% favor recognizing Taiwan as an independent country. 65% support Taiwan joining international organizations, and 57% support a free trade agreement with Taiwan. There seems to be an increase of American support for Taiwan. Now, why has this happened? Well, I spoke with a prominent expert on Taiwan in the United States, Professor Shelley. She is a Brown Professor of Political Science at Davidson College. She's also the author of many books on Taiwan, including Why Taiwan Matters, Small Island, Global Powerhouse. I asked her what she thought of the survey and why she thinks Americans are increasing their support for Taiwan.
Well, I think it's always good news when Americans are engaged and willing to take a position, first of all, because this is an issue that a lot of Americans don't necessarily have a lot of information about. On the other hand, I would not give too much importance to the changes from the previous survey to this survey, just because I think that some of the results in the survey suggest that this is kind of a pretty thin result, that while it's maybe a kind of gut reaction, I want to do something to help out Taiwan. The rest of the survey doesn't really give me a lot of confidence that people are well informed or are making a kind of coherent case for why the U.S. should, maybe make its policy a little bit more favorable to Taiwan.
So I think one interesting statistic was that 69% said they favor Taiwan becoming an independent country. And for us, if we were to declare independence, China would definitely invade us. So I think that kind of does show that people don't understand all the consequences of these different questions. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. And I also found the wording of the independence question, the wording of the question basically says Taiwan is a self-governed place, even though the PRC claims it. The U.S. treats Taiwan as a separate entity. Do you think we should recognize Taiwan independence? It almost seemed like the question was saying the U.S. treats Taiwan as an independent country, so should we treat Taiwan as an independent country? It was a very leading question, I thought. And it gave no sense of the trade-off that you just mentioned that I think would have maybe, caused people to answer differently. And this is why survey research as a guide to foreign policy is so difficult, because very often people don't think about the trade-offs that are involved in a particular foreign policy decision until they're actually faced with the consequences. And then they say, oh my, how did that happen? So I think what we see here is we see a rising sympathy for Taiwan, a sense of, hey, this is a good place, and the U.S. should do what it can to take care of Taiwan. And what that means is that then the sort of public opinion context, if the U.S. were to have to take some action to defend or support Taiwan, would be more favorable, right? So if you go into a crisis and 80% of the people in your country say, we don't want to get involved, then even if the president recognizes it's in the interest of the U.S. to get involved, it's going to be harder. If you have 70% saying, yeah, go for it, then in the moment of crisis, the president is still going to have to make a decision based on national interest. No U.S. president goes to war solely on the grounds of public opinion, but it does kind of change the context. And so I think that, it's not an insignificant finding. It's just one that I wouldn't recommend that, Taiwan independence advocates start saying, well, Americans all want us to be independent, so we should too. I think, we need to calm down and recognize that Americans who give that answer are not maybe thinking through the consequences in a way that they would if the moment actually arrived.
I am still curious also about public sentiment in the U.S. about Taiwan. It seems that it's growing, right? Can you explain, is there any particular reason or events in the past half year or year that you think has influenced public sentiment about Taiwan?
So one thing that's definitely going on is U.S. favorability toward the PRC is diminishing. And for many people, there is this kind of awareness that Taiwan is a kind of alternative to the PRC, or that Taiwan stands with the U.S. as our relationship with mainland China deteriorates. But I don't know that that's exactly enough to create this upswelling of positive sentiment toward Taiwan. Because knowing that you don't like China, or that, you're upset about things that are happening in China, doesn't necessarily give you an awareness of Taiwan as an alternative. Where I think the awareness of Taiwan as an alternative has come from is the COVID crisis, where many, many Americans are learning about Taiwan for the first time. And I'm experiencing this directly because people say, "Oh, you study Taiwan. Well, how come they had such good success against COVID?" So, I think that Taiwan's gotten a lot of very positive attention in the U.S. and around the world for its COVID response. I know my friends in Taiwan, they say, "Oh yeah, but then we had this COVID crisis of our own." And, yes, but unlike anybody else, you've managed to contain and prevent it from becoming uncontrollable in Taiwan. And now it seems as if the COVID crisis in Taiwan has receded, and there is the opportunity for Taiwanese to be vaccinated before, another wave comes along. And I think Taiwanese will be vaccinated, unlike many Americans who are, this has just become so political in the U.S. It's really tragic. So I think it's as much the positive attention that Taiwan has gained as a result of its successful response, and I still characterize Taiwan's response as successful even after this summer. Relative to almost every other country in the world, Taiwan's response has been very successful. People in the U.S. know that, and so I think that may be where the awareness of Taiwan, somewhat as an alternative to the PRC, but also as a sort of good story in its own right, may be coming from.